Happy Pride Month! Queens Public Library continues its ongoing commitment to promote queer liberation and representation across our borough and beyond. Whether you're looking for books and resources, engaging in inclusive programs, or just seeking a welcoming space, we are here for you. Come on by and let us know, what's your query? For more information, visit queenslib.org/Pride 2023. Summer reading kicks off this month. Visit summerreading.queenslibrary.org for our full summer reading program schedule, book lists for all ages, and other resources to keep your kids engaged and learning all summer long. Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery in the United States. Check out our reading lists and join us for a wide range of programs to learn more about this important day in U.S. history. Visit our website for more information.
Good evening. My name is Sharon Myrie, and I'm the Vice President for Programs and Services here at Queens Public Library. Hope you have a chance to check out our website to see all the exciting programs that we have this month. June is a very busy month, and so we really do hope that you get a chance to see us. It's such a great pleasure this evening to be a part of this very exciting and important focus tonight. The title is Alphapointe, Accessibility is the Key to Opportunity. And before I introduce our moderator for this evening, it is my great pleasure to introduce our President and CEO of Queens Public Library, who oversees our wonderful, vibrant, and robust system, and that is President Dennis Walcott. Dennis?
Thank you, Sharon. And first, let me say good evening to all, and to Scott and Laura. It is a pleasure meeting you, and just to share with the audience, I was in a very informative pre-show discussion, and I think just connected to the topic tonight, it's just educational for me, and I know educational for all of us as far as what you'll be talking about tonight. And I just want to thank you for joining the Queens Public Library, and we're here to work with you, to brainstorm, and to make sure that we provide the accessibility that's necessary to address all the topics that you'll be talking about. So again, a pleasure to welcome you to the Queens Public Library, but more importantly, thank you for all that you do and everything that you will share this evening. And Sharon, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much. So before I turn it over to our moderator this evening, Alphapointe is a multifaceted organization with an array of divisions, products, and services. It is a leader in the area of vision rehabilitation, education, and advocacy, and they're able to help anyone experiencing vision loss. We're so thrilled to be partnering with them for the first time, and we look forward to future partnerships in ways that we can continue to work with them and support our visually impaired customers. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over and introduce our guest moderator tonight, Scott Thornhill, who's the Director of Public Policy of Alphapointe, who will serve as tonight's moderator and introduce our panelists this evening. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Dennis. We appreciate. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. And we appreciate the library and being a partner with us in this. The Queens Public Library is a true treasure, and we thank you for the opportunity for this platform and to discuss this important issue of accessibility. And so we have an interview that I did with former New York Governor David Paterson that we will use as sort of a jumping off point for discussion tonight. So we'll have some of the words from the governor about various issues. And we'll look forward to hearing those portions of the interview. And we also have panelists. Unfortunately, Rebecca Alexandar, who we had as a panelist, is unable to join us this evening due to she was called away for work at the last minute for something that was out of her control that was very important that she needed to handle. And so we wish her the best and her team, and hopefully she'll be with us another time. However, we are incredibly fortunate to have Laura Allen with us, and Laura is someone who I personally look up to in the world of accessibility and disability inclusion. Laura is the head of strategy and programs for accessibility and disability inclusion at Google. She does a number of things in that role, working within Google and outside of Google. She recently returned, and we will talk about this a little bit. She recently returned from a trip to Nairobi, Kenya, about disability inclusion in Africa, and so that's something we're definitely gonna get into. But Laura, welcome, and we'll talk more about the work that you do as we go along. But welcome.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
And I look up to you too. It's mutual.
Oh boy, the Mutual Admiration Society. It's going to be great. All night, everybody can listen to how much we look up to each other. But no, Laura is doing amazing work, and people think about Google and they think, wow, this company, it's technology and all these things that you get to do. But I know that you find that even within there's so many different areas of accessibility, whether it's here in the United States or around the world, and everybody's at a different level of accessibility. And so I do want to just sort of point out, when we talk about accessibility, the word, it can mean different things to different people. And so what we're going to talk about tonight are various aspects of disability. And they will coincide with the clips from Governor Paterson and the interview that was done with him. And the reason that we chose that interview, it's part of our Foresight series at Alphapointe. So Foresight is a series of conversations with people we were calling change makers in the blindness community. And so that's why we chose that as the jumping off point, is that interview, because the governor is someone, of course, who achieved a very high level, one of only two individuals who are blind that have been governors of a state in the United States, and was able to be involved in discussions, of budgets and all kinds of things, and one of the largest states in the United States. And so it's an incredible journey for the governor, and also a journey for someone who's blind. And we don't separate those things necessarily, but how that blindness affected him as well. So we'll get into discussions about that. But accessibility will range from education to perceptions and representation within the community, and to many other components. So we will go ahead and start with the first clip regarding education.
I'm curious, do you think, in looking back, do you ever spend time thinking how things might have been different? Career may have been different if you had...
I think that although it was a great idea to send me to public school, I came to the conclusion while in public school that the less I bothered anyone, the more appreciated I would be. So when, there was writing on the blackboard and I couldn't see it, I just either got a friend to tell me about it or just listened. And this is not a good way to get an education. And I think I was very unable to address my issues. I had an itinerant teacher, a teacher that was sort of like the prelude to special education, who'd come and talk to me once a week. We'd spend a period together. But I never really complained about anything. And this would be a real problem for me when I got to Columbia, and also when I got to Hofstra. And at one point, when I was at Columbia, I went to a barbecue over the summer, and a gentleman asked another guy my age and I to go out and get him 15 kids to pack lunches for students that were going to summer school or summer camp. And we went out and we got 13 kids and put our names on the list. He hired everyone except me. And I didn't even do anything about it except get upset about it. And I told my parents about it. They didn't seem to understand. Finally, when they did, they sent a little polite message to the gentleman. They knew him, that they didn't appreciate the way he treated me. And that's when he put the final knife in my heart. Scott, you know what he did? he hired my brother.
Ah, nice.
Who was underage, by the way. So he broke the law twice. And I went back to Columbia, and this is a point where I lost self-esteem completely. I couldn't pick up a book. I couldn't concentrate because I thought, why am I doing all this work if in the end, I'm never going to get a job anywhere? And, but for an intervention of a professor who saved me from basically getting put out of Columbia, and his idea was to have me leave the school for a year. And he said, this time you go look for a job and you fight for a job until you get one. And then you can come back here a year after you started. Wow. And that was the best advice I ever got. And that changed my entire life. And it also annexed me to the idea of speaking for people who might have a voice, but don't use it.
So Laura, as we hear the governor's words there, I want to give even a little bit more of a backstory that some may not know. Governor Paterson was the 55th governor of the state of New York, and had been a state senator prior to that, and was a lieutenant governor prior to becoming governor. But even getting into his initial time of school, his mother had to fight to get him into a school system, and the teacher wanted to treat him differently and wanted to. So he really experienced that from the time that he started school all the way up to the point where he's at Columbia and then he's at Hofstra Law School. And so to me, when I think about education and accessibility, would you agree that it often success or what someone with a disability achieves often starts with education?
Oh, 100%. It really is. It has such a huge impact on someone's entire trajectory. So I think education is absolutely critical in the space of how do we have inclusive education? How do we ensure that teachers know how to be more inclusive and build equitable classrooms and give equal opportunities and support their students with disabilities, a wide range of disabilities. A lot of my story and my sort of personal narrative that I've wrapped my head around and wrapped my heart around over these years, now reflecting back, totally goes back to education and the path that I sort of had navigating through school since. And
Right.
Scott, I can go into this a little bit if it's
Please
useful
do.
at this moment.
Yeah, please do.
So I spent my first 10 years of life with quote unquote typical vision. And then all of a sudden, very abruptly lost a lot of my central vision in my left eye when I was 10, and spent months going to many different doctors trying to figure out what happened, what was going on. Was this just a random fluke that happened? What was the diagnosis? Finally figured out the right specialists and got diagnosed with something very, very rare called choroidal osteomas. And then just pretended like it really wasn't a thing. I was a typical 10-year-old and my right eye still had 20/20 vision. So kind of my brain pieced the rest of the world together. And with both eyes open, I still had typical 20/20 vision. And then when I was 14, after a few years of just ignoring this, the same thing happened in my right eye. So it was extremely abrupt. So this is where the school aspect ties in. I was in 8th grade in New Jersey. And it was within a couple of days, I went from typical 20/20 vision with both eyes open to at that time just being legally blind, not able to see anything centrally, not able to read any words on the page, see anything on the chalkboard, like Governor Paterson was saying, completely abrupt. And my school had no idea what to do. They were wonderful. They tried very deeply to support me. But when you're dealing with something that rapid in terms of a transition, I don't blame them for not knowing, okay, well, what do we do?
Right.
How do we all of a sudden transform every single piece of material for the student? So it was a huge period of transition where that summer, that was like May of my 8th grade year, that summer I got into a crash course of Braille lessons. But, I think back to that and picking up high school, which is already tough enough, and trying to do it in Braille when you're not really fluent in Braille yet, it was not going to work. So I had to sort of transition into, okay, well, how do I do audiobooks? How do I do, at the time it was, some of my books were available through recordings from volunteers. Many of them were not. So I would come home from school and my parents would read aloud to me after very long days of their own jobs. And I know for a fact that they did not want to go dive back into high school calculus and materials. Like, that's just not at all what they wanted to do. So
Right.
they were the ones who had to really, really piece things together with me for a few years there before we figured out the right rhythm with my school of a very messy and time intensive process of essentially, taking my textbooks. This was before the days of technology in every classroom and whatnot, where you
Yeah.
can just sort of use the right assistive technology to access the materials. We would take my textbooks and we'd remove their bindings and we'd feed the pages through a high-speed scanner, and then we would use OCR software to understand what's written on the page, and then I could use text to speech to listen. And it was not perfect. If you picture doing that on a geography book, on a page with a map, or
Yeah.
on a math book, a lot of people have had the same experience where that got me, I don't know, 80 or 90% closer to independence, which was
Right.
magical and transformative. But
Right.
there was still that extra last mile to go in many cases. So I always think about the impact of education and the impact also of your support system and your family and the people who are going to champion you through the process. So I
Yeah.
think those two things are so deeply tied. And if you only have one, or if you have neither, your chances of actually getting through the education system are so much more limited. So
Yeah.
I was very, very lucky, very grateful to have a school that was really trying and a family who was doing heroics. And
Right.
sorry, my dog is wanting to answer the question as well. He'll calm down soon.
Just to participate. Sure.
Yes, but yeah, I think education is such a critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. It's interesting as I remember my conversation with the governor and some other subsequent conversations that he and I had regarding education and just his experience. That being at Columbia and then leaving for a year and thinking, I always find it fascinating that this person who achieved, what anyone would consider to be one of the highest echelons of, well, certainly of government, being the governor of the state of New York, that this person felt like they had no opportunity to get a job, so what's the point of even remaining in school? So I think it really shows that regardless of where you are in your disability journey, that anyone and just about everyone can have those feelings at some juncture, along that journey. And just like you, my family was very supportive and was crucial in that regard. My mother was actually a substitute. She was a school teacher full time early in her career, and then after having children, she became a substitute teacher. And so she was often in the school, but I didn't want my mother, in middle and high school, my mother going and telling me, hey, my, Scott needs such and such, how much more embarrassing could that be? And so I think that's, as I recall the governor and his discussions about how his mother handled things, his teacher at the elementary school level literally said, you take David home and I'll get the class, take him and I'll get the class calmed down and prepared for him, and then he can come back tomorrow. And his mother said, that's not going to happen. Like, that's
Right.
not how this is going to be. And so I just found that to be fascinating, that his mother really, really was a stalwart. And he mentions, her on a regular basis, even today, talking about how she was just not going to stand for that. And I have talked to people, he said, when he got to law school and had people, helping him read textbooks, and we'll get into more of the clips as we move along, but how, some people criticized him for various components of how he handled things, but we all face the journey or face the situation and handle it the way that we believe that we need to. But and we'll talk more about employment as we move along as well, but the fact that he was trusted to find people to work, but he wasn't trusted to work himself, I think was also an intriguing part of that clip. And so we'll go ahead and we'll talk more about this as we move along, but we'll go ahead and do the second clip of the governor now, which will be an interesting story and then point us towards some discussion about representation, I believe. So.
And then the day came, right?
The day came.
The day
March
came.
10th.
March 10th.
2008.
So tell us just a little bit there. I know you've spoken a lot about it, but it's such a great story. Tell us.
I just went to work, and it seemed a little strange. They said that Governor Spitzer hadn't gotten to Albany, and I'm on the third floor where the halls of the legislature are, but the staff work on the second floor, and my staff has noticed that none of his staff has showed up, and he hasn't as well. So I'm, working there, and they asked me to cover an event for the governor, and I did that. And then they said, the cardinal is coming at 1:00. We need you to be there. The governor can't be there. I said, wait a minute. Has everybody here lost their mind? That is protocol. It's head of state to head of state. That would be as if the Queen of England came to Washington to see President Bush, and he doesn't feel like seeing her, so he sends Cheney. And then I added, but in that case, he was running the government anyway, so it might have been appropriate. But here it's not. By the way, President Bush laughed when I told him that I shared that story with him once. But I find out at about 5 minutes after 1, this incredible story about a prostitution scandal. And I've been told that you will be governor at 2:15 p.m. It's now 1:05. So my father, who I called, suggested to me that I contact the other state elected officials, and I call them all up. And the one that calls back first is the one I thought was the most busy, Hillary Clinton. And she said to me, there is something very ominous about this call, David. Is something wrong? And I said, well, Senator, I guess it's wrong, but what's going to happen is in about a half hour, I'm going to be sworn in as governor. Oh, my goodness, what's happened? And I said, no, the governor's fine. It's just that he's going to resign. And she said, well, why is he resigning, David? And I guess I didn't answer quickly enough. And she said, David, why is he resigning? And I said to myself, how do you explain a sex scandal to Hillary Clinton? And so that, fortunately, the governor postponed his resignation and allowed me a few days to organize so that I could, with very little time to prepare, assume the role of governor.
So, Laura, I am going to spare you, and we're not going to talk about scandals. Just so you know, and the library folks, the mute button might quickly be put on if we were to go that route. But no, just kidding. But what I do want to talk about regarding that clip, a couple of pieces about that clip. So Governor Paterson, I asked him during the interview, why did you accept the role as lieutenant governor? He was in a position as the minority leader, but they had a plan in place that it looked like they were going to take the majority. The Democrats would take the majority in the New York State Senate, and he would be the majority leader at that time. And he said, you know what? He said, I had some things I wanted to work on. And Governor Spitzer, Eliot Spitzer said, hey, I'd love for you to, come on and work on these items you want to work on. He said, I didn't want just a ceremonial post as lieutenant governor. Some people think that, that's what he was. But no, he had some things he wanted to work on. And frankly, there were some discussions because at the time they did think that Senator Clinton was going to potentially become president, and that would leave a Senate spot open. And the governor was interested in the Senate position. Just he freely talked about that in the interview. So, but what I want to talk about is representation. I really want to talk about what your thoughts about when we talk about accessibility and what it means for people to see. And I'll also ask you to comment on this. There are people who achieve at a high level who are blind or have other disabilities, right? We may call them the one-offs, or that person was going to achieve at a high level no matter what. They just had that personality and that drive and all of that. And people talk about someone became, for example, a computer programmer at Google, as an example, to throw out a name, or they became, some other incredible, position that they achieved. Could be the governor of New York. And so we may look at that and go, see, you can do it too. And for some people that
Mhm.
works, right? That motivation works. Wow, they did it, I can do it. For other people, like I was mentioning about Rebecca and some others that famous blind individuals that we know that climb mountains and do these things, I hear that and I frankly go, man, I'll never do that. It like doesn't encourage me,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
think I can't do that. And so when we think about representation of having someone who was blind at that level, I'm curious on your thoughts about what does that mean to you when you see someone achieve at a high level who is blind or otherwise disabled, and what do you think that means in your larger discussions in the disability community?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and I've had similar sort of conversations with a lot of my colleagues and friends on the subject actually about it's so fantastic having people excelling at these incredible rates and having I have some of my colleagues who have similarly like okay climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and done Ironman competitions, fully blind or other disabilities and they kind of fall into this bucket of just like superhumans, just
Right,
generally, just
right.
regardless of the disability, just superhumans. And it does start to create even further of a gap between,
Yeah,
let's say you're navigating a new disability and you're just trying to figure out how to do the day-to-day stuff. And then you
right.
hear about the person climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and it's like, well, the distance has never felt further.
Yeah,
And I do think that we have to be careful. And yes, share those stories, celebrate those accomplishments, but
yeah,
also tell them the balanced, like more holistic view of a person
yeah,
and some of the day-to-day items. I've had teammates and friends who have been excelling beyond their wildest dreams, but then still having real legitimate daily challenges with inaccessibility of particular apps on their phone or getting into an injury because of something that was uneven
yeah,
on the sidewalk and getting into a car, like getting hit by a car on the things like this that are still so representative of the inequity that still exists in many many situations.
right.
So I think that
Yeah,
we need to celebrate those accomplishments. We need to tell the more well-rounded stories and the human
yeah,
stories, and so that people don't feel this sense of okay, well, I'll never get there, I'll never climb the mountain.
yeah,
Maybe you will, maybe that is in the cards for you, but
yeah.
it's a beautiful complex story, I think, for all of
It
us.
it
So
really is, and how we balance that. And I'll tell you, I chuckled there just briefly, only because I thought of something my own, like, and I'm sure you get this a lot more than I do, but occasionally someone will actually think that I'm like an inspiration or a motivation to them. But
yeah.
I had I had one day a few weeks ago. I was on a trip and someone said, you really are just, you've mentored me, or you've really helped me realize what's possible. And I thought to myself, I said, thank you. That means so much. You can't, but in my head, you know what I was thinking? I was thinking I used hand lotion to wash my hair this morning. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
in the hotel, right? It's those things where
Yes.
uh, where it's those basic things
Mhm.
of life, or right, like I get excited because, like, I opened, without having to use another video service or something, like I opened the correct can of vegetables for a meal.
Yep.
um and yet we can also then look at the high level achievements where other people. I was on another meeting a little bit earlier today, and the question was asked about banking, like, how do I just
Mhm.
want to handle my own finances, like how can I do my own banking, and so we were talking about, the computer, using websites, using a screen reader, using your phone, an app on your phone with like voiceover on the iPhone, or
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the Google, the equivalent on the Google phone. But those are the things, right? And so it
Yeah.
is a balance. It is a balance of how we have that. But having that representation at a high level, I think,
Mhm.
whether it's a governor or it's someone else in elected office, or it's someone, frankly, like you, who's, head of strategy and programs at Google, or it's someone who's doing things that are just very meaningful, and not just the inspirational part, but to have. I've heard the term, right? If you don't have a seat at the table, you might be on the menu. And
Mhm.
so just having that proverbial seat at the table where you are a part of the discussions as they're happening. So thank you for
Yes.
um, pointing out those items.
Yeah,
we can go ahead.
well,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, if I could just add one more thing, I think
Yeah.
this idea of, yes, seat at the table to share your perspective and insights, but also just to give exposure to the disability experience.
Yeah.
I feel like so much of this comes from bias that people, might not even know that they have.
That's right.
About perception of disability, about perception of capabilities, what somebody can and can't do.
Yeah.
And that's where, if they don't really understand, if they haven't worked with somebody with a disability, if they don't have
Yeah.
somebody in their family, like they don't know. And then they
right.
might look in this, oh, you're so amazing, you did these very mundane, trivial things, or, oh, I'm so sorry for you. I pity, like I've gotten both ends of that spectrum of the pity of,
I have
people who criticized my parents for letting me go out of state for college, things like this,
Yeah.
where they're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're going to let her go? What do you mean? So
Yeah.
it really is such a spectrum. And I think the only way that we can break that is by being at that table in more situations, being on
Yeah.
teams, being in the classrooms, and breaking those biases and those assumptions. So yeah, representation is definitely key.
Because most people's hearts, I find, at least in traveling and everything else, most people's hearts are in the right place. People want to do the right thing. They want to help. They just don't know how most of the time.
Yeah.
To your point, I have a dear friend he and his wife were hiking the Appalachian Trail, and he's blind. And this woman stopped and she walked to him. She goes, I just want you to know that I am so inspired by the fact that you're out here, that you're doing this. And he said to me in a conversation later, he said, things won't really change until it's not a big deal that I'm out there. Right. And the same gentleman, they were at a dinner party with friends, and he had a steak, and his wife was sitting beside him. But this woman on the other side, she was like, would you like me to cut your steak for you? And he said, absolutely, I'd love for you. And his wife just gave it to him, right? She said, how dare you, you could cut your own steak, but he was sure, if you want to cut my steak. But anyway,
that's so funny.
There's moments where, it's, it can be quite funny. Well, we'll move on to the next clip, and there's lots more to talk about. So let's see what we have next.
It seemed as though you were not only treated unfairly, maybe when it came to sort of how you handled the budget deficit, but also with your vision loss and how you navigated that. Can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts, Saturday Night Live and others, and how they sort of portrayed you and how you handled your vision loss and your use of skills in that regard?
Well, throughout my career, my blindness was kind of an asset. People talked about how I was able to overcome these disabilities, how I had handled it in the legislature and that kind of thing. But it seemed as if the minute I became governor, and one of the heads of the National Federation of the Blind, Carl Jacobson, said to me that the problem is, when you get in charge, people now worry that your disability is impeding your performance and you shouldn't be there in the first place. And I got a lot of that. There was a major figure in my administration. He was my secretary, who was the governor's chief of staff. He had to resign. The New York Post writes an editorial called The Governor's Eyes, and how he was always reading to me, and now I didn't have anyone to read to me, and this would be a problem. There were 200,000 people on the state payroll, and the last I checked, all of them know how to read. In other words, it was not only vicious, it was ignorant. So then, of course, I think these articles, there was another article that I had made a statement, don't worry, we will be building at ground zero. Now, I knew we had started building, but it was so minuscule that people were afraid that the 10th commemoration of the attack on the country on September 11th, we wouldn't have anything there. So they write an editorial, someone should take the governor down to the site and let him touch the building so he'll know that that his administration, they've already started building there. And this culminated on December 6th of 2008, when Saturday Night Live does this, this kind of caricature of me, who's not only blind, but is stupid. The sort of Mr. Magoo character, walking into walls, holding maps upside down, unable to communicate well, and my press corps laughed and said, we're going to write. That's really funny. Now let's let the governor come on and speak for himself. And I refused to do it. And a few, not enough of them, but a few of the disability organizations came to my defense after that. And it, took me back to times I was ridiculed as a child and that kind of thing. And I put up with it for about 2 years. And finally, a very good friend of mine said to me, listen, David, you did the right thing. You fought Saturday Night Live, but they've offered you a chance to go on there. Now go on there and get even with them. And so I did. I went on and they apologized to me. And I said, you all made so much fun of me for being blind that I forgot I was black.
So again, it makes me laugh every time I hear that last part there. But again, I will spare you from commenting on the last portion there. But I will say this fits perfectly, I believe, with what we were just talking about. So people can achieve at a high level. You can have that representation. You can have someone that just amazes people and all that. However, when push came to shove and you now have someone who's blind in a top leadership position making these decisions on behalf of the state, right? You have the media and some other people who look at that and go, whoa, wait a minute. I don't know if we would call that a glass ceiling. I don't know what term we would put to that, but it's kind of like, we'll let you get to a certain point, right? Your blindness is a virtue, or it's an asset, and we really think that you're amazing. But now you're in the spotlight, and people are kind of portraying you a certain way, and the governor speaks more about that too in terms of using a cane and different things. But what are your thoughts about that? Is there still, I believe that you've mentioned the bias, like there's still that thought that someone who's blind or otherwise disabled just might not be able to do the job?
Yeah, I think it's bias. I think it's fear.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit of the, if you heard about the concept of like the crabs in a bucket, and it was one is crawling up the side, somebody else is going to pull it back down. And I think it's a little bit of all of that together. And again, I think we just have to have more and more people in leadership positions proving these sentiments wrong and breaking through that ceiling, getting out of the bucket. Like, I think that's the only way that we can break this. Yeah.
And something that I know with the governor and some of the things that he was dealing with in terms of people within his own administration that were doing certain things that seemed to kind of subvert some of the efforts that he had, and just the thought that can this person really do the job? I'll focus it back to something about the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Don't we all want to go back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics discussion?
Oh, yes.
It's always a fun thing to talk about. If people out there listening tonight or watching tonight, if you have nothing else to do, to spend a couple of hours reading Bureau of Labor Statistics information. But the top reasons, there's been a number of studies done about employers hiring people with disabilities and why they do and why they don't. The top two reasons in the most recent research that was done, the top two reasons why employers do hire people with disabilities is they think it makes them look better to their current employees and it makes them look better to their customers. The top two reasons why they don't, number one is they are not sure that the person they're hiring can do the job. Or they're afraid that either the disabled employee or other employees are going to get hurt because they hired a disabled individual.
Oh, gosh.
And so the top reason being that they're not sure the person can do the job. How do you think, other than just more people sort of getting into those positions, do you think that, do you personally think that will ever change? Do you think that mindset will ever change, or does it just incrementally maybe get better year over year?
I think it will change, but I think it won't change without intentionality.
Yeah.
So I do think, like, I just remember back years ago, I remember doing a presentation at Google in front of a pretty big group of people with one of my colleagues. We were talking all about different types of assistive technology to a group that really, this was not an accessibility focused group. This was a broad group who worked across a few different product areas.
Right.
And we decided to have my teammate, who's fully blind and uses a screen reader and a braille display, who's a software engineer, just kind of show a demo of how he does his coding using his screen reader and just sort of demystify it. Because I think the biggest question was, like, people may look and say, oh my gosh, that's so cool, there's a blind engineer. They don't know how, they don't go a step deeper to say, how does he actually do his work? So if somebody didn't know how, they might just assume that he's less capable or that he's slower. No, he was schooling everybody. He listened so quickly back to text to speech. So that I remember getting feedback after that presentation of, oh my gosh, listening to the screen reader verbalize the code was so eye-opening. And again, that was one of those moments where the perception just sort of like burst, and it was done in a really, non-threatening way. And it just created a different level of understanding. But how do we do that at scale? How do we also do it in a way where I think so much in the workplace has to do with the manager and what a manager creates in terms of their team, and a manager knowing the best way to support an employee with a disability.
Right.
And I think that there's still so much more that has to happen there in terms of manager training, empathy, awareness of how to best support people with a wide range of disabilities. So I think that's an area that we have to just keep pushing on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that accessibility, since that's what we're really talking about tonight, that accessibility, that word means, like I mentioned, so many different things, right? It's accessibility in terms of getting the data, getting the information, getting the materials that you need. It's accessibility to a job. It's accessibility to the employer, or even to the interview. I talk with people that struggle with these application tracking systems that are used today, right? It's almost, it's like you got to submit your resume and do all these different things, and yet even those systems sometimes are not the most accessible. So, the accessibility of the facility, right? Accessibility is so many different things, but the accessibility to, all right, I'm going to, you're probably, if you laugh at this one, it's okay. But so the accessibility to the heart, or the accessibility to the mind, right, of someone, like, do you really, is someone who is not disabled, right? Is their mind and their heart really accessible to someone with a disability? Because it's so easy to make assumptions, and it's easy to say, this person is obviously deficient in some way because of their disability, right? So they probably can't perform this job as well as someone who isn't deficient, quote unquote, in that way. And so I think your example of someone seeing how that individual, witnessing how that individual did their job, is probably how we get past a lot of that. I just kind of think, how many of those opportunities are we going to have, right? I mean, how much of that can people really witness and open their minds and open their hearts to it's not only, a lot of people say, well, it's just the right thing to do. No, it's not just the right thing to do. It's, in many cases, it's the smart thing to do, right? You've got 20% of the population, roughly 20% of the population that identifies they have some sort of disability. And so if you sort of even unknowingly exclude that percentage, 1/5 of the population, and let's say, a number of those you don't necessarily know, you visibly know that they have a disability, even if it's 10%, if you exclude that number in the population, you're excluding an incredible amount of talent, you're excluding an incredible number of people, right? And so even just economically and for businesses and all of that, it's the smart thing to do, to be willing to open up and experience and witness what other people are capable of before you decide for them whether or not. I don't know about you, I've had many people decide for me whether or not I was capable of doing something.
Absolutely. And I think, once you have more and more people, and you have that representation on teams, in businesses, that's really the best way to actually ensure that you're going to have accessible products and services too, of whatever you're building out into the world. The culture you're putting out, the services you're putting out. I mean, if you don't have somebody with different perspective,
Yeah.
helping to shape that process or that product, I mean, it's not going to be inclusive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a huge input as well of like what
Yeah.
a company is able to actually put back out into the world.
I agree. And then they open up markets, they open up more sales. And then plus, I
Yeah.
think that's why this push to have more representation on boards and more representation in senior management, all of that is
Yeah.
is a good way to go. So, okay, we'll move on to the next clip and we'll have the next subject.
As a foresight question, we ask a foresight question for our series. If you could change one thing about the future for people who are blind, what would you change?
I think that I would, in a lot of the service organizations, really spend more time on the individual's actual feelings about themselves and about life and periods in their life. So, for instance, one of the big problems for all disabled students is after high school, because they might actually intellectually be able to handle the material, but the socialization around it, many disabled people are sort of separated. I remember I was probably the most popular kid in the class, but 8th grade, freshman in high school. I don't remember when it happened. Somebody had a party, and I knew him well. He didn't invite me. He didn't see me as part of the social, community in the school. He saw me as an academic. And so this kind of typecasting really hurts, particularly young people, because young people, mistreat each other, bully each other, caste system each other. And I think what I would want is for the service organizations to really start working with the socialization of the students as much as the academics, because it's extremely important to the human psyche that somebody feel like they have value in all areas of living. I didn't really feel that way.
So, I want to, as we come out of that clip, I want to say I believe that we have Rebecca Alexandar with us now. Is that right?
Yes.
Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us. And I know you had to deal with something that you had no control over, and so thank you for being here and joining us.
Well, I'm so sorry that I'm so late, but I'm very happy to be here at all, and particularly at a time when I'm hearing that video clip. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, tell me your thoughts. Let me hear your thoughts on that clip. If that touched you, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that this is what's so interesting is this the othering of people who have vision loss, and because we operate in a world that looks at people who are blind or low vision specifically for what they can't do. And our world is set up that way. And as we know, and Laura has probably spoken about, I picked up the tail end of what she just said, but that it's actually not low vision or people who are blind who are incapable. It is the structural, the digital, the environmental spaces that create that disability, that make us even further sort of ostracized, and particularly I think for kids and for students and for young people. And if there was a way for us to allow, I think, people who are low vision or blind to have the opportunity to speak about their experience, to humanize themselves, to be included in social, and I think, I almost think about people. I encourage kids that I work with, they're teenagers, when they're struggling with their vision loss and knowing how to navigate schools and not wanting to use their cane and feeling so much of the stigma. I always encourage them, well, what if you were to take control of the narrative and to offer to give a presentation to your class about what works best for you and how you operate? Because I think a lot of that discomfort and the othering that happens is because people don't know.
Yeah.
We simply don't understand and know how to interact in ways that are sort of normal.
Yeah. And I wish that I had had someone giving me that message when I was in school. I was so ashamed and so embarrassed, with I have retinitis pigmentosa, and so I was ashamed. I had no reason to be, right? But you're not thinking that way as a teenager. Thinking back on it, I go, wow, that was silly. Why was But I was that way, right? I wanted to hide it. I didn't want anybody to know because I saw myself as lesser than. Everyone, people with disabilities were sort of portrayed as not being able to do things, and who wants to be that person, right? Nobody wants to be the person that can't do stuff. And so the more that you're right, the more that becomes turned around and becomes more of a positive in certain ways. I talk about how people with disabilities are often the best problem solvers you're ever going to hire, and things like that. So Laura, did you have any additional thoughts on that one?
It just resonates so much, everything that you just said, Rebecca. So, and also just this idea of, when I think back to my earlier days of losing central vision and just the lack of confidence I had in myself, it just went straight down. And this was high school, when high school is already hard enough socially. And when I got to college, so for me, I don't use a white cane. I now have a white cane, but back then I wasn't using it, and I wasn't using a service animal. So, and I do wear glasses because one teeny little fraction of my visual impairment is also nearsighted. So the glasses help one tiny fraction.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm told that it's more of an invisible disability. And in college, socially, that was the hardest piece of, if people didn't know, and I hadn't had a chance to tell them. Think about how many different people you're meeting in college. I got publicly sort of yelled at for being rude and unfriendly. I remember a girl yelled at me in the cafeteria once, and it's this, I genuinely like to think that I am a friendly and loving person. And that is the false perception of who I am, but I wasn't strong enough to hold that cane as a symbol back then.
Yeah.
And, I think it's just something that so many people struggle with, especially in the realm of invisible disabilities.
Yeah.
Both visible and invisible, quite honestly. Yeah. Gotta reduce the stigma. And if I had somebody like Rebecca or a mentor telling me that of, own it, be strong, like it would have made a big difference, quite honestly.
No, I agree. And my wife encouraged me to get a cane. I didn't want to get a cane because I thought it was like, oh, this is the ultimate admission, right? That I've got a vision, like I was going to stop the progression of the disease, or like I was going to change it by not having a cane. And so I finally, she said, if you don't want to get it for you, get it for other people who don't know that you can't see them. And me being a big guy, right? I'd walk through, I'd, take somebody out, I'd, deck somebody in a store or something, unfortunately, but yeah, same way, right? You that's not who you are, and it's not, but yet the shame or the pride or whatever it is, right? Or the inability to be able to talk about the disability is challenging. Well,
I wanted to chime in too. I think that, partially for me in my own process of coming to terms, and, I have Usher syndrome, so I have the hearing loss as well. And I started learning sign language, and then, well, what do you do when you learn sign language and you can't see? So then I learned tactile sign language and protactile sign language, which is a language completely based on touch for the deafblind. And in my process, what I realized is that all of this stuff makes me so uncomfortable, like gutturally uncomfortable, like makes me nauseated to think about. I mean, at the time, to be in public, using a cane, less because of the actual cane use and more because of the way that I would be perceived and treated. And so you're coming to terms with your own feelings, your own internal struggle with this. And then you're also on top of that, taking on the perceptions and beliefs and limiting beliefs of everyone else around you. And it's too much to bear, I think sometimes it feels like. But so for me, using my cane, and I say often, and to anyone who asks me how I first started using my cane, I cried the first 6, 7, or 8 times because it was a coming out. It really is a coming out, and and you have to go through that process. But I also think that facing these fears of mine, what is my biggest fear? My biggest fear is of being deaf and blind. That is my biggest fear, is of not being able to. And so, okay, so if that's my biggest fear, then what do I need to do? And one of them was go out in public and use your cane.
Mhm.
And I did that, and I, cried the entire way. And, I learned sign language because it was like, well, I don't want people to think I'm deaf. Well, then maybe you need to. And so it's sort of almost like that from a psychotherapeutic perspective, what we call in vivo exposure, that, exposure therapy, to try to destigmatize or to make it less anxiety provoking.
Yeah.
And I think that is really what's been so beneficial to me. Very painful, very difficult, and by no means sort of like a walk in the park. But I will tell you that I think we can all probably agree that as challenging as it is to live with low vision or blindness, there is tremendous kindness that we find out in the world when we do put ourselves out as authentic as we authentically are. Yeah,
Absolutely.
There definitely is. I mean, there are those. There is that small percentage that but you're going to have that no matter what. But a large majority of the people I interact with are kind and want to be helpful and those kinds of things. And the use of my cane, I'll tell you, we'll be walking through a restaurant or somewhere, and my son will be helping me somewhere, or go using a restroom in a restaurant, right? So I'm not going to try to just use my cane and get there or whatever. So he may assist me, and we'll be walking, and someone will just stare at me, right? They've never seen a blind person before, right? Or they're amazed. And it irritates my son quite a bit. He'll stop and stare back at them or something along those lines. It's always, and I have to say it's okay, right? It's okay. And maybe I have a chance to educate someone. Maybe I have a chance to sort of share with them something. But well, let's move on. We're going to do our next clip, and it may be the last one we do. But we're going to do one more clip here, and let's see what we've got, and then we'll get some more comments.
In terms of Alphapointe specifically, so we have a wide range of jobs, and that's one of the things that we've tried to do is meet people where they are. Some people have gotten a higher level of education, and maybe they want to pursue a job that's IT related. But not everybody is at that level, either in education or in other skill development. So it's one thing we've tried to do is have jobs at all different skill levels, so that not that someone necessarily stays where they are. If they want to grow, then they can do that. Do you see that as a positive way of approaching that situation with people with vision loss?
I think that in terms of an effort made by an organization, that if you can meet the skill level and find jobs for people who have that skill level, you've wiped out a long process of training. Then correlative to that would be that you would want to recognize the areas that people need to go in and they don't really have the training, and try to identify ways to give them the skills and training that they would need to hold those jobs. It's a very interesting dynamic. And frankly, the fact that we're even talking about it right now, when we still have large unemployment in the deaf population, nearly 90%, and even in the blindness population at over 60%, and for other disabilities as well, I think about the fact that if one of the government agencies actually dedicated themselves to employing the disabled, and in this case the blind, in areas where it could be extremely helpful, I think it would send a message to the private sector as well.
So I wanted to get to that clip only because we talk about employment. So we've talked about, Rebecca, we've talked about earlier a little bit about education. And of course, there's other issues, right? There's transportation. There are other things that we could certainly, the 1 hour is not going to give us the time to go through all of the potential issues related to accessibility. But as it relates to employment and that, that access piece, I am curious, and you can take something from what, the governor just talked about, or talking about organizations and providing opportunities. But I really want to get to sort of where you see the future of employment for people who are blind or who have disabilities in general. Where do you see that going with technology? AI, right? We could have a whole nother hour on just AI probably nowadays, but where do you see that going in terms of opportunities? Are they increasing? Are they getting better? Are we moving the needle? I'd love for both of you to answer that. And Rebecca, if you want to start.
Sure. So, as I think likely this was mentioned before, disability drives innovation. And it is one of the most important things for us to sort of educate, whether it's the government, the private sector, about. I mean, when you think about Google Maps, when you think about all of this, all of these different types of AI technologies and strategies that people use, it oftentimes is driven specifically and created by people with disabilities, or because of someone with a disability speaking up, and then it just sort of picks up and takes off, like wildfire. Unfortunately, that is not the right example to use right now, given that I'm in New York City with very poor air quality. But so I think that that's so important that we think about, when we think about disability, we think about what people can't do and what accommodations we have to make. And we don't think about the opportunities that are created and the creativity that comes when you live with low vision or blindness. It means that on a daily basis, you constantly are working from a place of innovation and creativity, because you have to. You have to find a way to make it work. And so I think that if we were to take a bit more, have more faith in hiring people in sort of more of those even developmental stages of creating technology and digital, access, that we would, that there would be a lot of interesting new developments.
And thank you. And so, Laura, I want to ask you the same question, but with a slightly different twist. Okay. So I know that you recently, and I know Rebecca, travels and speaks all over the place. But Laura, I know that you recently returned from a trip to Nairobi, right? Nairobi, Kenya,
yes.
right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you participated in the well, you tell us about it, right? Inclusive Africa. I want to hear about it. So I want to know sort of what you're seeing happening there as we relate it back to what Rebecca was just talking about, and that sort of thing. What are you seeing in terms of where we are in the United States, where people are in other countries, and what you're seeing there?
Yeah. So I was there for a little under 2 weeks. I was there for the Inclusive Africa Conference, but also we were doing, a few of my colleagues and I were doing a number of different assistive technology trainings for the Android accessibility features. And we were so happy to be able to fund a set of Chromebooks for some of the different schools for the blind there outside of Nairobi, and got to go and do hours worth of trainings of using the Chromebox screen reader and the magnification tools, and just get a sense of, this was the first time that so many of those kids had ever touched a computer, which was just the most meaningful, impactful moment. And there is a long, long way to go. There is a long way. Every country is different. Every culture is different. At those schools for the blind, something that stood out to me so deeply is, the Kenyan culture is so beautiful and warm and friendly, and you just feel like your family as soon as you land. It was incredible. And at the schools for the blind, there were lots of little kids walking around, and none of them use canes. And this is a school for the blind. And it's the one low vision kid who leads other children with less vision or no vision. They're all holding hands or holding arms. And it's this beautiful, beautiful display of this warm culture and trust. And when I was commenting on this to some of the staff, I was saying, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. Look at these children. And they said, it's beautiful, but it's such a symbol of they do not feel comfortable using canes at all, even in a school for the blind. So there's so much more when it comes to cultural perceptions of disability, when it comes to technology and the distribution of technology and connectivity. So much of the tech that we have and that we're building does require Wi-Fi or a data connection. And how do we think about those barriers, and how do we enable more offline access to technology? How do we make sure that assistive technology is free and integrated into the technology that we're distributing, even if it's not the fanciest model of the different hardware? So there's so much more that has to happen. And I think we just have to keep sort of intentionally busting out of our different bubbles that we're in.
That's awesome. I've had people say to me, and I think it's interesting. They're like, if there was a time in history to be blind, this is the time. This is the time. And I said, well, it's easy for you to say if you're not blind. But anyway, no. But I I kind of agree. Like, with the technology and with the little bit of the changing perceptions, and some of the things that are out there in terms of diversity and inclusion and accessibility and what we're talking about. I would love to end on a positive note as we talk about this, and not to say, hey, we're so much further along than this country or that country, or we're doing everything better, because we know that's not the case. But I would say that we do have a lot of opportunity. There are, with the technology that's there and being developed, there is a lot that we can build on and things that we can do. And it almost feels like the hearts and minds have to catch up with the technology sometimes. The people that have the opportunities have to be willing to sort of open up to those possibilities, and what Rebecca was speaking to earlier about and having it not being a negative side of things, but sort of looking at the the possibilities more so than what people can't do. So any final thoughts as we wrap up? Rebecca, would you like to start? Anything that you see, positives, things that you're feeling really good about? How about that?
Sure. I was hoping you'd ask Laura to start, but I guess I'll go.
All you.
Well, here's what I think. I think what's so important is, and there's nothing I hate more than social media. Please understand loud and clear. And yet I also think that there is an opportunity for us to be role models to people, because certainly when we were growing up, there were not people like us who are out in the world and showing people who are, kids in general, they don't know that they're incapable. They learn it. Yeah. And they learn it based on the way they're educated or how they're not educated. But they learn it based on how they're treated and coddled. And so I think that one of the things that is so important now is that there are so many role models out there, people of all different races and, sexual orientation, gender orientation. And so there is much more of the ability now to find people who you can really look up to in ways that was, I think, much more difficult when we were growing up. But I also think that it's so wonderful that we can be connected. I mean, I am so delighted, Scott, to be connected to you and also to Laura. Laura is someone I've known from sort of a distance and afar. So to be able to connect in this way, someone that you admire, who's, even a contemporary, is just so meaningful. It really allows us to know that we're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, anything you'd like to share as we finish up?
I couldn't agree more. I really do feel like the technology is sort of helping to make the world a little bit smaller and just more connected. And I totally agree. Like, we need to be setting the examples, and we need to create more opportunities for mentorship and for showing more positive stories about success, and for breaking down these barriers and helping each other break down these barriers, helping parents to know how to encourage their kids and not pity their kids or limit their expectations of their kids with a disability, but just encourage them and support them and love them, and helping the education system, helping teachers, helping employers. I mean, there's so much more to be done, but we have made a ton of progress. And I think, especially, I mean, I do feel like we are starting to see more and more focus from the employment side. There's a long way to go, but we're seeing more and more focus, and we're seeing more intentional sort of processes be put in place for interviewing and for hiring and for career progression, and more and more. I work with a lot of different companies that have our employee resource groups of employees with disabilities that come together to create community and to help support each other, and honestly to fight when something is not going well, and to help propose solutions. And I think that has been an incredible movement of, again, the community of people who are sort of in similar situations banding together to help drive meaningful change and feeling like they have a voice to do that within the company. So I think we've seen a huge trend of those employee resource groups, not only for disability, for so many different types of situations and groups and identities, But I think that that's really starting to take off as well, which is very encouraging.
And I think people being willing to speak up and speak out like you're talking about. And I think that for a long time, like we were talking about, right? We didn't, Laura, you mentioned it, and Rebecca, a little bit, it's sort of like we didn't necessarily want to say a whole lot about our, our disability, whatever the case may be. But at Alphapointe, for example, our camps, we hear from our team. I hear from our team quite a bit that you have a lot of children that come to that first day of camp, and the parents, like we're talking about supporting the parents, they are concerned about that child, right? This child can't see, and how are they going to do this, and how are they going to do that, and I've been with them every day, and how are they going to, they start at that first day of camp and they don't want to get the, they want to get the food for their child, and they want to do everything for them. By the end of the camp, a lot of times that child is, hey, I'm good. I'm able to get my own food. I'm able to do my own thing. And we've had some incredible stories and just some examples you see with children. Well, as we finish up, I want to thank you, Rebecca. I didn't really at the beginning get to say it, but a therapist and author and extreme athlete and like climber of mountains and kayaker of big rivers and things and things that I would never think about doing, to be frank. But so impressed by you and honored to have you here. And Laura, as head of programs and strategy and programs for disability inclusion, amongst quite a few other things, and Disability Alliance Group for with Google and all the work that you're doing. I'm just honored to have both of you on here. And to the Queens Public Library, thank you for having us and partnering with us. What an amazing operation that you have, and your commitment to inclusion and accessibility, and also to Governor Paterson, who we had on for the interview, and I know he's got a lot going on, and we thank him for his willingness to speak out and to, frankly, as we heard about with Saturday Night Live and sort of things, to kind of taking some heat about some different things, and still speaking up loud and proud about the fact that he is blind and the journey that he's had to get to where he is today. So thank you for being with us, and thank you to the library. And I look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
both.
having us.
Thank you.